Let's discuss the latest on the conflict in the Middle East. Professor Alon Burstein of the Israel-Palestine Report is here with me. A lot to discuss tonight, Alon. Let's start off with a question from Jeff. Jeff asks the question that is on a lot of people's minds, which is basically about the idea of regime change in the country. He asks, besides the Kurds, what other group in Iran could rise up? What are the options, Alon?
Good to see you, Austin. And as always, great questions from the viewers coming in. So it depends a little bit what do we mean by rise up? Because the uniqueness of the Kurds that is the reason that most people are discussing them at this point is that, number one, they are a very big population. You know, they're a minority in all the different countries that they're spread across: Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey. But there's a total of about 40 million Kurds spread throughout those countries. And in each of those countries, there are armed Kurdish groups. And that's the issue with the Kurds. They are armed in most of those countries, and they have developed relations with Israel, the United States, sometimes backed by different forces also in the region in all those countries. And that makes them somewhat unique. On the eastern side of Iran, on the other side of Iran, Iran's big. On the other side of Iran, there is also a rebel group or several rebel groups that are fighting along the border with Pakistan. This is groups, there's a conglomeration of different groups. The Liberation Movement of Baluchistan, basically it's a bunch of groups that are fighting for the Baluchistan region, which is a region on the eastern side of Iran that is partly in Iran, partly in Pakistan. They have also carried out insurgency attacks against Iran over the years. And theoretically, they could also now try to take advantage and engage. But those are really the two big groups that are armed. What there is a lot of hope within the United States and Israel is that the protesters themselves, not necessarily armed, but that they will rise up as well. Now, if that happens, the regime has proven that we will see a massive crackdown and possibly mass executions as part of this. But there are sort of two avenues that I think Israel and the United States are hoping that that will not be the case. One is if there is mass protest, Israel and the United States are really hoping that enough security forces in Iran will refuse to repress them, that they'll see that in the end the rebellion is going to win. Israel and the United States are bombing them back to the Stone Age, and they'd rather lay down arms. That's why Trump has said that the Iranian soldiers should appeal to the United States in order to defect and things like that. So that's one hope. The other hope is that Israeli attacks and American attacks will be able to suppress the repressing troops enough that the protesters, even though they're not armed, will be able to rise up and actually take control over different areas and possibly take over police stations and somewhat arm themselves that way. It is also possible, it's been rumored, that Israel would like to open a corridor from Iraq, basically, through Iran, using the Kurds in order to allow gun running into Iran. But again, that's all speculation. At this point, the armed groups are really the Kurds and possibly the Baluchistan rebels on the eastern side of Iran. Otherwise, we're talking about theoretically mass amounts of protesters that might rise up, but they are unarmed at this point.
Let's talk about another thing a lot of people are asking about. And I'll just put up this question from Adrian. He's in Kansas. How do we know if the school in Iran was actually hit by the US or if Iran did it themselves? I've been looking over the same reports that you've been looking at, Alon. A number of news outlets have looked into this, and they say it appears that the U.S. Was responsible for this attack. The U.S. asked directly about it. They say that they are looking into it. From everything that you've been reading, how are we to digest this sad story that happened the day that this all began?
So really, to put that, as you said, in context, on the first day of bombings, really the first wave of bombings that happened, Israel was primarily bombing the northwestern parts of Iran and Tehran, and the United States was primarily bombing the southern parts of Iran that include the areas of Minab where this school was hit. Now, no one's disputing, no one in Israel, the United States, or Iran is disputing that the school was hit by a bombing and that 175 people were killed likely in total, the vast majority of them schoolgirls, some of them also staff that was working in the school. Then the question is, what was it hit by? The United States was bombing in that area is one point that we have to take into consideration. And the United States, according to its own maps, had target packages in that area. There were buildings that were marked as part of offices of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in and around the areas of that school. Now, so initially everyone just assumed that it was a bombing, either the United States or Israel. Then some rumors started to float that Iran had been firing a lot of missiles and drones, other activity back at the United States and at Israel, and maybe one of those was a stray missile that hit. And we've seen these types of things. We saw this in the war in Gaza when it was actually proven to be a rocket of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad that misfired and landed in the Al Ahli hospital. Israel was initially blamed for it, but then a lot of experts examined that and showed that actually it was the PIJ rocket. In this case, all of the experts that have so far looked at this have come to pretty conclusive conclusions that it was not an Iranian missile. They're not saying, they cannot necessarily prove that it was a United States bombing, but if we're looking at it as either a United States bombing or an Iranian missile, they've looked at the trajectories of the different Iranian missiles that were fired. They've looked at all of the images that we have access to, but a lot of reporters have access to many more things than I have. But they've looked at through leaks and through military documents at all the trajectories of the missiles and how they were flying, all the things to see if a missile could have misfired or landed there. It does not appear to be the case. So at this point, my running assumption is that this was a bombing of the United States. With that, it's important to note that unlike a lot of situations that happened, again, in the Gaza Strip, or that have happened in Lebanon, or also that happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the attacking party, either Israel or the United States in this case, has argued that yes, it hit a school, or yes, it hit a hospital, but it had good reason to, because there was militant activity there, because there were tunnels built underneath, weapons were stored there, etc. In this case, even if we assume that the United States did carry out that bombing, it is very likely simply an accident. It was very likely simply a misfire on the part of the United States. Possibly it was lack of knowledge that a school was there and thinking that that area is just the offices of Revolutionary Guards, or possibly it is, again, just targeting something and the own missile from the United States misfiring. That I'm not bringing up as an excuse of therefore it's okay that a school was bombed. I'm just saying when we try to understand the context in which this is happening, the United States has not said, even if it was us, it was justified. If the United States does take responsibility for this, chances are we'll get, I don't know if an apology, but a recognition that it was a mistake, which is different than other cases that we've seen primarily in Gaza, but also in Lebanon, also in Iraq, where the country that, if it did take responsibility for the attack, actually said, but it was justified. I doubt that we'll hear that from the United States. I don't think the United States is going to actually try to say that, even if it takes responsibility.
The U.S. giving us a little more insight into what they've been targeting and how much they've destroyed. The U.S. military says that it has destroyed or damaged 43 Iranian Navy warships since the start of the war and hit over 3,000 targets. That 43 number, by the way, was 30 yesterday. So another 13 warships that the U.S. is discussing so far at this point. CENTCOM also sending out this list saying the types of targets that they've been aiming for. That includes command and control centers, IRGC joint headquarters, and Aerospace Forces headquarters, integrated air defense systems, ballistic missile sites, Iranian Navy ships, Iranian Navy submarines, anti-ship missile sites, and military communication capabilities. I'm noticing there's no nuclear targets mentioned there, Alon, but are we seeing reports out there, at least unofficially, that either the U.S. or Israel are targeting areas that have to do with Iran's nuclear program?
So I want to say also, I'm looking down because there's just reports coming out that Iran has fired another round of missiles targeting Israel. It is currently, the missiles are on their way targeting the northern areas of Israel. I want to get back to the missile thing also in a minute, because Iran has actually started to do something a little bit different in the way it's firing missiles at Israel today. So maybe we'll circle back to that.
We'll get to the nuclear question in a moment. That's, I am curious, how often is Iran shooting these barrages of missiles at this point?
So it's been going down. In the first day of the war, we're talking about last Saturday, Iran fired over 90 missiles. Then it went steadily down, 65, 20, 25, and now it's around that number, still going down. Throughout the last 24 hours, there were, I believe this is the 4th barrage of missiles. Each one of these is sometimes several, sometimes just one. Because again, what Iran is trying to achieve may be a missile getting through the air defenses, but mostly making sure that Israelis are all getting angry because they're all in the middle of the night now rushing to bunkers, and hopefully Iran wants them to then pressure the government to stop the war. One missile can sometimes do that. But there are two things that Iran has started to do differently in the last 48 hours. One is they have been using more cluster bombs. What that is, there's a lot of images that have come out about this of just civilians taking pictures. What that is a missile that has a barrage of several different warheads on it. Sometimes it is 5, sometimes it's, I think, up to a dozen. And when it comes close to its target, it separates and detonates into a bunch of smaller bombs that then come landing. Now, obviously, that's to make it more difficult to intercept these. These have caused more damage in Israel. They haven't caused any deaths in the last 48 hours, but they have been causing more damage because they are harder to intercept. I will say cluster bombs, many types of them are illegal by international law. That said, Israel and the United States and Iran have all used them. But in this case, it's something that's being pointed out. It is something that is not supposed to be used, but of course it is used by a lot of militaries. So that is something that Iran has started to do. But there's a second thing that I've noticed in the last 24 hours. In Israel, when it comes to missiles that come from Iran, because of the distance, there are two sets of air raid sirens and alerts. The first says, and this is the alert I got now, for example, missiles have been fired from Iran. Expect air raid alarms within the next few minutes. So it gives you an additional warning. And then the air raid sirens in the area that is being targeted will go off usually about 5, 6, 7 minutes later. So this is meant to give people, especially families with kids, enough time to get to the bunkers, enough time before they have the air raid sirens, which say a missile will be hitting within the next minute and a half. In the last 24 hours, that early warning has not worked. In the last 24 hours, there's been 3 barrages aimed at Tel Aviv, and there was the early warning sign, and within a minute or two, already air raid sirens are going off, which gives people a lot less time to get to bunkers. Now, there's been no official comment about this. The Israeli military put out a statement simply saying this is not an error. This is something that may happen again. So they're saying this is not due to miscalculations, some things changed. And that's all the Israeli military said. I then saw an announcement of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, I believe it was now in El Arabi Al Jadid an hour later, saying that they have begun firing new types of ballistic missiles that are using a combination of solid and liquid fuel. I'll be honest, I don't exactly know what that means. They didn't say anything about them going faster or et cetera, but they did say that. So I'm putting those two things together. The fact that in Israel, the early warning signs are not working as well. The Israeli military has said that's not due to our error, so something's changed. And then the Revolutionary Guards putting out a statement saying they are now firing a new type of missile that is using different types of fuel. Seems to me that Iran has managed to upgrade something. Will this make a difference in the extent of damages caused in Israel or not? Remains to be seen. Like I said, this is now happening for 24 hours, but that's one of the innovations of these missile barrages.
Azerbaijan on Thursday accused Iran of a drone attack on its territory that injured 4 civilians, and Azerbaijan vowed to retaliate. Azerbaijan alone, it's the first time, I've heard of a lot of Gulf states coming up here, but Azerbaijan saying that they intend and they vow to retaliate. Is there a chance that a state like Azerbaijan could actually fire back at Iran?
There's a chance. We've seen a lot of states that have been saying they're going to retaliate. Qatar was going to retaliate. Saudi Arabia was going to retaliate. A lot of states are saying they are going to retaliate. Very often, especially the Gulf states like you mentioned, they have not actually retaliated yet. And there's all kinds of rumors that this is happening as a result of backroom deals that are happening. Iran saying, if you don't fire us, we won't fire you again. Or the Houthis saying, remember Houthis, we've said they haven't gotten involved yet. Maybe them saying, if you fired Iran, now we're going to open another front for southern Saudi Arabia. Azerbaijan's a little bit different because it's in the north. It's north of Iran, so it's not really under threat of the Houthis. And I'd say that there is a chance that Azerbaijan would retaliate. Azerbaijan finds itself in a precarious position because of the weird array of alliances within the broader Middle East. Azerbaijan, even though it is largely a Muslim country, it actually has close ties relatively with Israel, and Israel has been one of its main arms suppliers. Also has close ties with Turkey. It puts us in a weird position where usually it tries to stay out of these types of conflicts. So in this case, they might. Usually they try not to. I'll say two more things about them. One, earlier today, in addition to that drone attack, Azerbaijan announced that they have arrested 6 agents of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards that, according to Azerbaijan, were plotting to carry out terror attacks against the Israeli embassy and a synagogue in the capital of Azerbaijan. So that's one fact. A second fact that has to be taken into consideration: Azerbaijan has been trying very hard over the last year to get on Trump's good side. Azerbaijan was the first country that announced that they were going to be willing to send troops to the International Stabilization Force to Gaza. Now, that didn't actually happen, and they ended up pulling back as a result of pressure from Turkey. But Azerbaijan has been trying. They've wanted to do that, and that may also be some impetus for them to actually fire at Iran, because they may want to show Trump, all these other countries are not helping you, we are. So on the one hand, they try to be neutral. On the other hand, they right now have an interest, and it may be an easy way to get on Trump's good side to say, we'll join in the bombings of Iran.
So to kind of follow up on what you said, that we're hearing of Iran firing new missiles, this is 2 different vantage points of Tel Aviv, 1 and 2. So does that mean that we're expecting the Iron Dome could be in action somewhat shortly here, Alon, or are these missiles just being fired and they have some time before they would make their way over to Israel?
So first of all, according to, again, what was initially reported, the early warning, it said that the missiles were targeting northern Israel. So we're not going to see that in the view of Tel Aviv either way, at least according to the initial warnings. But then usually we would have about 6 to 8 minutes, depending on where this would happen. And now, just now, as I'm looking down, air raid sirens are going off in northern Israel, in the Western Galilee area. So that is, again, we're not going to see it on the map. I have, I don't know if you want to turn to me, I can show it on my phone, or I can show it on the map here.
Yeah.
Where they're going off, like these are the alerts that are going off in Israel, and where that is targeting is this area over here. So it's really going towards North Israel, where the map that we had pointed was central Israel, was Tel Aviv over here. That's mostly what they're targeting. That's also where Israel has the best air defenses. This is targeting much more the northern Western Galilee area. So this area over here. Now, again, there's obviously air defenses there too, and it is likely that this missile will be intercepted. I'll report more. There should be news flashes coming in any moment. But that's where this is targeting right now. The northern parts of Israel, after we had 3 barrages towards central Israel earlier in the evening, this is now going to the north.
Gotcha. Let's talk about what we've been hearing on the Russian front. And people at home might be scratching their head. Why is there a Russian front in this? Well, we heard some reporting today that Russia has provided Iran with information that could help Tehran strike American warships. Alon, if you can, just help our audience understand why there's a Russian connection. And really, ultimately, are we surprised that we're hearing that the Russians are helping the Iranians in this way?
Honestly, I'm surprised that we've only heard about that now, right, and that Russia hasn't actually activated before. Russia and Iran have developed an interesting relationship over the last 4 years. They were always close, or closer, as a result of just the array of alliances in the Middle East. Israel, much more allied with the United States, wouldn't you know? First the Soviet Union, and then Russia, much more allied with Iran, the enemy of Israel and the United States. It's just the way the array of alliances work. But Russia found itself in a unique position 4 years ago after it initiated the invasion of Ukraine, and the world retaliated with the most crippling sanctions almost in modern history. It disconnected Russia from the SWIFT system. It barred all companies from carrying out any business with Russia. 90% of Russia's imports and exports were affected. And this was really crippling for the Russian economy while it was sinking into the mud in Ukraine. Who, to some extent, came to their rescue was Iran. And the reason was that Iran was already a pariah state. It was already under massive sanctions. The United States had pulled out of the nuclear deal that it had signed in 2017. It had pulled out of that. It was already under sanctions from the United States. It would be soon under sanctions from Europe as a result of the snapback mechanism. So Iran simply violated most of those sanctions. It became one of the main importer and exporter with regards to Russia because Iran was also under similar sanctions. They're also cut off from a lot of world economy. And that related to primarily two things. One, the export of oil. Iran, again, heavy sanctions against anyone who does business, oil business with Iran. But wouldn't you know, Russia didn't care, already under heavy sanctions. So Iran ended up selling a lot of energy resources to Russia. Russia, in turn, was also buying from Iran a lot of weaponry. One of the ironies is that Russia, despite its vast size and despite the extent of its military, actually found itself, because of mismanagement of how it carried out the invasion of Ukraine and because of these crippling sanctions, found itself in a shortage of planes, a shortage of drones, a shortage of bullets. And Iran was very happy to supply. So Iran, ironically I say, because the Soviet Union used to be the one that was spreading weapons across the world, and then Russia inherited a lot of those weapons. Russia actually found itself in a shortage, and Iran was the one that was supplying it with a lot of weaponry, a lot of pictures of suicide drones made in Iran that were being used in Ukraine. Wouldn't you know, as a result of this growing relationship, Russia is now very happy to also help Iran in response. Obviously, Russia also has an interest in the United States not succeeding. Russia sees the United States, sort of shaping the world the way it wants in Venezuela, then possibly in Iran, possibly in Gaza. Just recently, the administration said next is Cuba. Russia does not like the United States, so the hubris that is happening, the United States sort of getting ahead of itself and changing the regimes in the world as it wants. Russia has an interest in the United States failing at this. So it's both Russian interest to combat the United States indirectly, like during the Cold War, but also as a result of that quote-unquote special relationship that has developed between Russia and Iran, ironically, because both were under heavy sanctions.
So kind of adding on to that, Aviv has a question about, and Alon, if you need, just let me know if you need to catch up with some of the reports there. A live look at Tel Aviv, by the way. We've been kind of checking through our feeds. We unfortunately do not have a live camera in northern Israel right now. We'll be looking to see if we can perhaps connect to one, just in case there are.
The reports are that the missile has been intercepted already, like the alert is over.
Okay.
So it may have been intercepted likely outside of Israel on its way.
Gotcha. Aviv asks this question. So we talk about the concept of Russia supplying intel to the Iranians about where to strike. Aviv, adding on to that idea, who within Iran's government or military actually decides where its missiles are launched when so many leaders have been killed in action alone? What level of clarity do we have on who's actually calling these types of shots?
It's a great question. Most of the long-range missiles that are fired at Israel are still being fired by the Iranian military, not by the Revolutionary Guards, but there's very, very close coordination between them, and the joint decisions that are made end up coming from the political establishment, the current council that is leading Iran, that then goes to the newly appointed Secretary of Defense and the newly appointed Chief of Staff and Commander of the Revolutionary Guards. Even though these were assassinated, just like any military, if in the United States or in Russia or in Israel, the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War was assassinated, then someone else would be appointed the next day, and that someone would be making decisions. Similarly in Iran, the fact that those assassinations happened, they create confusion. They obviously deplete human resources. They obviously deplete a lot of knowledge, but they're not gonna make the military ineffective. They made the military ineffective momentarily because there was no chief of staff, but that was rectified within a day. So most of those decisions are still made by the political establishment and then filter down to the commanders in the field. The difference is between those long-range missiles that are striking Israel or striking other countries and the attempts to strike at US military targets at sea, for example. Those are two different things because the decisions to strike at Israel or other countries, those come from high up. Those come from the political establishment. Those come from calculations. A missile is not fired at Israel that is not approved by the political channels because it has to do with a lot of mechanisms that are within the Iranian chain of command that say you cannot carry out an attack externally unless this is approved by A, B, and C. Similarly, no attack is happening against Qatar, Azerbaijan. There were reports that Saudi Arabia managed to down 6 drones and a missile that was targeting oil fields. That's a major thing that happened several hours ago. None of that is happening without the political establishment approving it. That's different than the ongoing military engagements, the attempts of Iran to fire missiles or drones at U.S. bases in Kuwait, for example, or at U.S. warships. That is something that is much more decisions that are taken by officers, not just the boots on the ground, the officers, but that's already orders that were given. Try to carry out these attacks as much as you can. So there's a difference between the broader attacks targeting either very strategic things like oil fields or sites in Israel, as opposed to military engagements that are carried out at least more by, or decisions are made more by officers in the field.
President Trump earlier today said that there will be no deal with Iran until, quote, unconditional surrender from the Iranians. Unconditional surrender. So far, have we seen any sign whatsoever that Iran is ready for an unconditional surrender?
We have not, and it's also important to scale that back because Trump put out that message, but then in a White House briefing, I believe it was a White House briefing or maybe it was an interview, one of the spokespeople was asked what does unconditional surrender means, and the response that was given was when Trump feels that Iran is no longer a threat to the United States. That's very different than a complete and unconditional surrender. The concept of unconditional surrender obviously reminds us of World War I, World War II. And in those cases, again, unconditional surrender means you hand over your country to the victor. Now, possibly Trump is thinking that that is going to be the process, but at the same time, he's also said that, oh, sorry, I'm just seeing another alert coming in. At the same time, he has also said that he wants to see a different leader come up in Iran. He sort of said he doesn't care who. He doesn't say it has to be not a supreme leader, but a different leader that will be friendly to the United States, that will be able to work with the region. Theoretically speaking, if a pro-Western, more moderate, friendly dictator was appointed now supreme leader, I think Trump would be okay working with him. So unconditional surrender reminds us of a country completely giving up and handing over the keys. I don't think, at least the White House tried to scale that statement a little bit. So I'm not sure we can understand exactly what that means at this point. When it comes to your question, are we seeing any signs of this? I will say flat out no, at least in what is being reported. Obviously, internally, I imagine that there is deep turmoil within Iran's security apparatuses and their political regime. There should be great turmoil as a result of what is happening. But when it comes to signs that we'd be looking for deeper cracks in the foundation, these would be reports of mass defections. This is what happened at the beginning of the Syrian civil war, when all of a sudden there were 4 top generals in Assad's army that made a video publicly saying, we're not gonna bomb the people. That's a sign of massive cracks in the foundation. When we had politicians that defected, in the case of Libya, we had the Libyan ambassador to the United Nations saying, I no longer represent this murderous regime. I am now saying take it down. Those are the main cracks in the foundations. So far, we're not seeing any of that. We still have Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, who's presenting a more, I'll say, diplomatic stance. He's been doing that since the beginning of the war, but he's the only one. Ali Larijani, who's probably the strongest man in Iran right now, the head of the National Security Council, still making a lot of militant statements about what is going to be an ongoing war until victory. I will say that right now there are alerts that this is again the preempt before an air raid siren that there's going to be some missiles targeting both Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I'm seeing both of those. So we may see in the next couple of minutes, either on screen or, of course, I'll update as it happens.
Yeah, we have 2 vantage points of Tel Aviv. We can check and see if we have any of Jerusalem as well. I don't think we do at the moment, but
Jerusalem,
now,
I will say, is more spread out. So even if you do, it'd be less likely to actually catch that. Where it is in Tel Aviv is more centralized.
The time right now in Israel is about 5 a.m. on the nose. This question coming in from Bart, and by the way, we will keep an eye on these vantage points alone. In fact, you know what, while we're at it, let's turn the audio up on this camera really quickly. Sometimes we can hear air raid sirens on some of these cameras.
Yeah, so again, they're not going off yet. There's this was a pre-warning, so it should probably, unless they're intercepted much earlier, will probably go off in the next, I would say, it used to be 6-7 minutes. Now, if this is this new missile, maybe next minute or two.
Gotcha. While we keep an eye on the feeds, let's get to Bart's question. Bart asks, what are the realistic chances of a ceasefire at this point? Feels like this will go on for months.
It's a great question. And again, it depends. It really depends who you ask. And it really depends on, I would say, two critical factors. Trump's decision. Trump could decide tomorrow. We're done. We've assassinated the supreme leader. We've done enough damage and we're done. And now we'll give Iran another chance. And Trump has surprised us. He's surprised us in the past when we thought that he was going one way for sure. Then he turned another way. Again, the example that I always give, obviously, I follow Israel-Palestine. A year ago, Trump was talking about the complete deportation of all Palestinians from Gaza, taking over Gaza. He said, we will own it, the United States will own it, and we're gonna rebuild it, and it's not gonna be for Palestinians. 10 months later, he pretty surprisingly suddenly turned around and, oh, here, air raid sirens are going off in Tel Aviv right now. I don't know if you want to turn to that.
Yeah, let's hold that thought right now. Let's go to the cameras. So we've got 2 vantage points in Tel Aviv. Right now, the audio is turned up on this camera. We're not hearing anything. It does look like our other Tel Aviv shot is panning around. I do not have direct contact with the videographer on the ground. So all we kind of have to glean from these images.
The person with the camera that is clearly trying to look for something.
Hearing the sirens in real time. I'm going to just listen into this for a moment alone while you scour your sources. What we do here at Live Now is we bring you live feeds in real time. We bring you the raw vantage point, and this is what it feels like to live in these areas. This air raid siren appears to be quieting. Alon is still here on the line with me. And Alon, I'm going to keep an eye on these shots. Unclear to me if we will see any missile interceptions in the skies above Tel Aviv. I'll remind the audience, 5 in the morning, Israel Standard Time. We'll get back to Bart's question. Bart sent the question in of what are the realistic chances of a ceasefire at this point alone? Feels like this will go on for months.
So what I was saying is that, first of all, it depends very much on the decision of Trump. Trump has very much surprised us over the years, but specifically over the last year, when it came to, it seemed like one trajectory was going and then all of a sudden went to another trajectory. When it came to even the war in June between Israel and Iran, it was in full swing until Trump simply decided, okay, enough. And then Israeli planes were en route to carry another bombing raid, and Trump called Netanyahu and said, call them back. And Netanyahu did. So that is one avenue where it's going to go to ceasefire if Trump simply either feels that it's done enough or starts to feel like it's damaging him politically. Those could be reasons to all of a sudden have a turnaround. A second avenue for a turnaround is if in the Iranian leadership, we start to see some sort of signs that someone is taking control and is trying to take Iran in a different direction. All the rumors are the next supreme leader is going to be the son of the previous supreme leader. It's going to be Mujtaba Khamenei. Those are the rumors at this point. He's a known radical. He's considered a very conservative figure, very hawkish figure. At the same time, he has a lot of loyalty within the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. And if he says, we need to bow our heads down now because we can't withstand this, let's go to a deal. We'll violate it in 2 years. Let's go to a deal now. That may be another way for things to spiral down. Let's say either up to Trump to change his mind due to political reasons or due to a sense that things are changing, or up to the Iranian leadership. Otherwise, at this point, we're unlikely to see things spiraling down. A lot more countries are going to start mounting pressure on the United States. Already, Qatar and Saudi Arabia are reportedly mounting more pressure. Gas prices in the United States and Europe are going to go up. Markets are going to go down as we continue to have at least trouble, if not a complete blockade, in the Straits of Hormuz. And Trump does not like when the economy doesn't do well, especially when it comes to stock markets. So it is possible that will mount pressure as well. At this point, the United States is saying it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks. Will it take 4 to 6 weeks? Will it not? Both Israel and the United States announced that they're starting a new phase now in the war. I'm not sure if they know how long that phase is going to last, because everyone's waiting for some change to happen in Iran, either a new leader coming up and changing direction or a protest breaking out. So far, neither of those things have happened. So right now, it's a bit of a waiting game to see where things go. One last thing I'll say, there were reports that I saw just moments before I came on air that the United States is considering or maybe has sent a third aircraft carrier, is departing and is going on its way to the Middle East. That has to be also taken within context. The United States, by no means, needs a third aircraft carrier to be on its way to the United States. The United States and Israel have complete air superiority in Iran. They are overwhelmed the Iranian defense systems. There is no need for that. If that is being sent now, that is a signal. That's a signal that we're bringing even more overwhelming firepower than we already have in the region. That is a signal that we're preparing for the long game. Could be a negotiation tactic, could be a way to try to bring Iran to its knees to force it into some sort of deal that Trump wants. But when I saw that, that to me is clearly trying to flex your muscles almost beyond your bicep that's exploding with what the United States has brought into the Middle East, saying I'm going to do it even more. I think it's a way to try to tell Iran, you better back down because we're not backing down. I'm just willing to continue to commit more and more troops. But militarily, it's definitely not needed at this point. That's what I'll say.
Last week, Americans went to bed on a Friday night, and then they woke up on a Saturday morning learning that the U.S. and Israel carried out this operation. And since then, we've been doing nearly nonstop war coverage. If it hasn't already hit the 1 week mark, in the next couple hours, it's going to hit the 1 week mark since the strikes began, Alon. For those of you who are new to Live now, Alon joins us almost on the weekly, usually discussing the war in Gaza or a number of other Middle Eastern affairs. And Alon, if I could ask you kind of a wider, kind of a 3,000-mile question here, how has the region changed in just a week's time? I mean, it was 8 days ago that we were still talking about, yeah, it's possible that the U.S. and Iran reach some sort of diplomatic agreement. They were still holding those talks in Geneva.
It was last Friday night. We said, will it be this weekend or will there be a deal? Absolutely.
In a week's time, how has the region changed?
So there's a couple of things that, I mean, we obviously don't know because the region is in constant flux, but there's a couple of things that I would say no matter what the outcome is, are going to be a change in the region. One is that the taboo that existed throughout the entire Arab and Muslim world by and large, that even if countries go to war, they do not attack each other's natural resources, that taboo has been broken. Iran already violated that in 2019, but that was a very mild violation. Now, Iran is firing missiles and drones and suicide drones targeting oil refineries, targeting oil fields, targeting natural gas refineries. And that is something that, you just don't do in the Arab or Muslim world. Even when we've had wars between Arab nations, Muslim nations, it was something that was just not done because the entire Middle East heavily depends on these things. The fact that that was done now is probably going to lead to some extent to an arms race in the Middle East, because regardless of what happens with Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Iraq, all these countries that rely so heavily on the export of their natural resources now are going to need to invest massively in air defenses, massively in security around their resources, much more than before. So that's going to be one of the things I think is a big time legacy of this, is we're going to see a major buildup of arms and defensive arms primarily, but also navies within the Gulf countries, because what was before that no one will attack our resources is not anymore. So that's one facet. The second facet really depends on how this turns out, because if the regime in Iran falls, then not only are we going to see a monumental rise in the prestige of Saudi Arabia as now the unchallenged leader in the region. Until now, Saudi Arabia and Iran sort of compete with one another. We're going to see Saudi Arabia almost like after the fall of the Soviet Union in the United States, being the only major player in the area that can say we lead the Islamic world. But in addition to that, we're going to start to see possibly a spiral down of some of the proxies that have happened throughout the Middle East, and maybe entering into an era of a little bit more friendly neighbors in the region. I'm not even talking about with Israel necessarily. I'm talking about also rivalry between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. I'm talking about also rivalry between Lebanon and Syria. If Iran does spiral down, so not only will, the regime changes, not only will there be an end to the proxies and the funding of the proxies, but what will probably happen is the countries that have, I'm allied with Iran, you allied with Saudi Arabia, you allied with Turkey, all of a sudden will possibly develop a little bit more friendly relations because they no longer have the backer of the big bad Saudi Arabia, the big bad Iran rivaling Saudi Arabia. So that's another possible legacy. A third thing that I'll say is Israel's firepower at this point is scaring the region. Israel is a small country. It's always had a very powerful military, but with that powerful military, throwing in the largest army it was ever able to throw in to the Gaza Strip, over 350,000 soldiers were massed around the Gaza Strip at the beginning of the war. It failed to take over an area, that's a quarter the size of New York and actually subdue Hamas. It has managed to destroy Hezbollah despite all this time. So even though it's known to have a very, very strong military, its actual engagements in military capabilities have not been proven in the last decades. That's very different now. And now when Israel's carrying out attacks in Syria, carrying out attacks in Lebanon, this is both scaring the region. It might also convince the region to come into more friendly relations. Saudi Arabia may have an interest now in developing more normalized relations with Israel to get access to those air defense systems, for example, and things like that. But the balances of power, where everyone knew that Israel had strong military capabilities, but it was not actually being shown with regards to the Palestinians or with regards to Hezbollah, when it comes to engaging other countries, not terror groups, engaging other countries, Israel's firepower now is something that has also scared the region, and we'll probably see a buildup of arms also as a result of that. So those are going to be the two big legacies, but the rest of it depends on what happens with Iran. If this is successful and Iran's regime is overthrown, that's going to be obviously a game changer in the Middle East. If it's not successful, that's going to be a major slap in the face to the United States and its attempts to orchestrate the Middle East the way it wants to, and that's going to have its own legacies as time goes on.
We thank you for the context this past week. Much more to come. Alon, how can people follow your coverage and your teachings?
Hit me up on the Israel-Palestine Report on YouTube. That is where I upload, at this point, daily or twice a day, summaries about what's happening in the war. Usually I used to do it about once a week about what's happening in the Middle East. Check out my website, online courses about the history of the Middle East, the conflict in Iran. Happy to see everyone. Unfortunately, I live and breathe the conflicts in this region.
That is pretty much, and it's also evident from the fact that every year you and I do about a 90-minute long recap of everything that happens. My gosh, our recap this year is going to be really long.
Start catching your breath.
Seriously. Alon, good to see you. Have a good night.
Have a good